A lonely Wyoming cowboy answered a widow's forgotten marriage letter, but when she arrived with her little boy, he was too afraid to let them into his heart. Caleb Hart promised Mara safety, shelter, and protection, yet one locked room in his cabin held the secret that could break their fragile new life. The town judged her, the frontier tested her, and a brutal storm forced Caleb to face the grief he had buried for years. But when Mara finally packed her bags to leave, the forgotten letter revealed the truth he could no longer hide. This is a story about late answers, quiet grief, and the kind of love that does not arrive with grand promises, but with patience, courage, and a place at the table. And by the end, the same letter that was once lost in the dust will become the first page of a family, the letter beneath the floorboard. No one in Willow Creek knew the letter was there. It had slipped beneath a loose floorboard in the old post office, tied with a faded blue thread and marked with rain stains from another season. For 7 months, it lay in the dark while winter came and went, while trains passed through the valley, while cattle froze in the north fields, and while one woman far away waited for an answer that never came. By the time Caleb Hart found it, he was not looking for a wife. He was not looking for hope. He had stopped looking for most things. But when he opened that letter and read the first line, his hand shook. My name is Mara Whitcomb. I am a widow with one small boy, and I am not asking for romance. I am asking for a safe place to begin again. Caleb read those words twice. Then he looked out the post office window toward the empty road, where the wind blew dust against the hitching rail. The letter was dated 7 months earlier. Caleb did not know if Mara Whitcomb was still waiting, already married, or buried beneath the same silence that had swallowed her letter. But something about the faded blue thread around that paper made him feel as if he had found more than a request. He had found a question meant for his own broken heart. And Caleb understood something that made his chest tighten. Somewhere out there, a widow had asked the world for help, and the world had forgotten her. The year was 1878, in Willow Creek, Wyoming territory, a small cattle town pressed between brown hills and a hard blue sky. Caleb Hart owned a modest ranch 3 miles east of town. It was not the largest spread in the valley, but it was steady. He had cattle, 2 horses, a clean well, and a cabin with a stone chimney that smoked every morning before sunrise. From the outside, Caleb looked like a man who needed nothing. He kept his fences mended. He paid his bills on time. He tipped his hat to women, spoke kindly to children, and never raised his voice unless a storm was drowning him out. But inside his cabin, there was one room he never opened. Behind that door sat a small cradle. It had never held a child. 3 years earlier, Caleb had buried his wife, Anna, after a fever took her before their baby could be born. He had built the cradle with his own hands, sanding the wood smooth, carving tiny stars along the side because Anna loved the night sky. After the funeral, Caleb placed a sheet over it and shut the door. Since then, he had lived like a man passing through his own life. He ate at the table alone. Every evening, Caleb set 1 plate, 1 cup, and 1 chair beside the stove. The other chair stayed pushed against the wall, gathering dust, as if even the cabin had stopped expecting anyone else to come home. He slept little. He worked until his hands bled. And every Sunday, when the church bell rang, he stood at the back and left before anyone could ask him to supper. People in Willow Creek called him respectable. Some called him cold. But Caleb was not cold. He was careful not to want anything he could lose. The day he found the letter, he had gone to the post office to repair a broken floorboard for old Mr. Hensley, the postmaster. The board came up with a groan, and there, in the dust, lay the envelope. The name on it was faded. To any decent man seeking a wife. Caleb almost smiled at that. Almost. Mr. Hensley squinted at it and sighed. Must have slipped through last fall. There was a leak in the roof that week. A whole stack got scattered. Caleb held the letter gently. Did no one answer her? Not that I recall, the old man said. Widow with a child, maybe. Men looking for brides usually want young women with no trouble attached. Caleb looked down at the folded paper. No trouble attached. As if grief were a stain. As if a child were a burden. That night, Caleb took the letter home. He placed it on his kitchen table beside his oil lamp. The blue thread around it had faded almost gray, but it was still tied tight, as if Mara Whitcomb had wanted to keep her words from falling apart. He read the whole letter slowly. Mara was 30 years old. Her husband had died in a logging accident in Missouri. She had one son, Eli, age 6. She could cook, sew, mend, read scripture, keep accounts, and work hard. She did not ask for fine things. She asked only for honesty, shelter, and a chance for her boy to grow without fear. At the end, she had written one sentence that stayed with Caleb long after the lamp burned low. I have been brave for so long that I am tired of being brave alone. Caleb sat with that sentence in the dark. If you had found that letter 7 months too late, would you have answered it? Or would you have told yourself the moment had already passed? Then he took out paper and ink. His first letter was short. Mrs. Whitcomb, your letter was lost through no fault of your own. I found it months late. I do not know if you still need an answer. I am a rancher in Willow Creek, Wyoming territory. I have a home, honest work, and no habit of cruelty. I cannot promise an easy life. I can promise no harm will come to you or your boy by my hand. If you have already found peace, forgive this late reply. If you have not, you may write back. Caleb Hart. He sealed it before he could change his mind. But after he posted it, something unsettled him. For the first time in 3 years, Caleb waited for something. A reply came 6 weeks later. The envelope was thin, the writing careful. Mr. Hart. I had stopped waiting for an answer. I thought perhaps my letter had been read and judged unworthy. I am still in need of work, shelter, and a lawful home for my son. I will not pretend I am lighthearted, but I am honest. If your offer remains, Eli and I can take the westbound train at the end of May. Mara Whitcomb. Caleb read it under the cottonwood tree outside the post office. The train would arrive in 9 days. 9 days sounded like enough time to sweep a floor, stock a pantry, and place a child's bed near the fire. But it was not enough time to teach a grieving man how to open the one room he had kept locked for 3 years. 9 days to prepare a cabin that had not welcomed laughter in years. 9 days to open the room with the cradle. But when Caleb stood before that closed door, his courage failed. He placed his hand on the knob, then stepped away. No, he whispered. Not yet. So he cleaned the main room. He bought flour, coffee, beans, and sugar. He repaired the porch step. He borrowed a small bed from the pastor's wife for Eli and placed it near the hearth. But he left the locked room shut, and the forgotten letter stayed in his coat pocket, tied with blue thread, close enough to feel against his heart. Caleb thought sending the letter was the hard part. He did not yet know that the real test would arrive on the train, holding a little boy's hand. A widow steps off the train. On the morning the train arrived, half the town came to watch. Willow Creek did not get much entertainment, and a widow coming to marry Caleb Hart was more interesting than a circus. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Men leaned against posts, pretending not to stare. Children craned their necks. Caleb stood apart from them, hat in hand, his face still as stone. Then the train screamed into the station. Steam rolled across the platform. A woman stepped down with a small carpet bag in one hand and a child holding the other. Mara Whitcomb was not what the town expected. She wore a plain brown dress, clean but faded at the cuffs. Her dark hair was pinned simply beneath a travel bonnet. Her face was tired from the journey, but her eyes were steady. Beside her stood Eli, small and thin, clutching a wooden horse with one broken leg. Eli's fingers were wrapped so tightly around Mara's hand that his knuckles had turned pale. He did not cry. He only looked at Caleb with the careful eyes of a child who had already learned that grown men could disappear. Mara looked around the platform until her eyes found Caleb. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Caleb stepped forward. Mrs. Whitcomb. Mr. Hart. Her voice was calm, but Caleb saw how tightly she held her son's hand. He wanted to say welcome. He wanted to say he was glad she had come. But the words tangled in the place where grief had lived too long. So what came out was, the wagon is this way. A shadow crossed Mara's face. Not anger. Disappointment. Mara had crossed hundreds of miles on the hope that this man's letter had meant kindness. But in that first cold sentence, she heard something else. She heard duty without welcome. And Caleb knew at once he had wounded her without meaning to. The ride to the ranch was quiet. Eli sat between them, watching the wide land roll by. Mara asked polite questions about the weather, the well, the church, the schoolhouse. Caleb answered each one with few words. He could feel her hope closing like a door. At the cabin, Mara stepped down and looked at the porch, the clean windows, the small garden patch waiting for seed. "It is a good place," she said softly. Caleb nodded. "I hope it will do." Her fingers tightened on her carpet bag. "I did not come expecting luxury, Mr. Hart." "I know." But he did not know how to say what he did mean. That she was braver than he had expected. That her son looked too small for the weight he carried. That the cabin had felt dead that morning, and now it felt like it was holding its breath. The wedding took place the next day in the church. It was simple. Pastor Reed read the vows. Mara stood straight. Caleb spoke quietly. Eli watched from the front pew, holding the broken wooden horse. When Caleb promised to protect and honor Mara, his voice almost broke. But no one noticed except Mara. That evening, she cooked supper in his kitchen as if she had lived there for years. She moved carefully, not taking over, not shrinking either. Eli set 3 plates on the table, then hesitated. "There are only 2 chairs," he said. Caleb looked at the table. He had never needed more. Mara quickly said, "I can stand." "No," Caleb said. He went outside, brought in an old chair from the shed, and wiped it clean with his sleeve. It was rough and uneven, but he placed it at the table. Eli climbed onto it with a little smile. For the first time in years, Caleb's table held 3 people. But later that night, Mara saw the locked door. "What is in there?" she asked. Caleb's face changed. "Nothing you need." The words were sharper than he meant. Mara lowered her eyes. "I understand." But she did not understand. She only understood that her new husband had a room he guarded like a wound. Mara did not ask again that night. But from that moment on, the locked door stood between them like another person at the table, silent, patient, and waiting to be named. And Caleb understood that the first wall between them had already been built. Mara had come west expecting hardship, but not a husband who treated his own heart like a locked room. And soon, the whole town would decide whether she belonged there at all. The town that would not forgive. Weeks passed. Mara worked hard. She rose before dawn, made coffee, fed chickens, washed clothes, and helped keep the books. She never complained. Eli began to follow Caleb around the barn, asking questions about saddles, ropes, calves, and stars. Caleb answered the boy with patience. He showed him how to brush a horse from shoulder to flank. He fixed the broken wooden horse with a small carved leg. He taught Eli to whistle with 2 fingers, though Eli could not quite manage it. Mara noticed all of it. And Caleb noticed her too. He noticed how she hummed when she needed bread. How she read to Eli by the fire. How she always left the last piece of cornbread for someone else. How she looked at the hills in the evening, not as if she wanted to leave, but as if she was trying to believe she could stay. Still, he kept his distance. He was kind, but careful, respectful, but closed. And the town was not kind. At church, women asked Mara questions that sounded sweet, but carried thorns. Was it hard traveling so far with a child? Did you know Mr. Hart before writing him? Do you think a widower's house is the best place for a widow's boy? Mara answered with grace. But words can bruise even when spoken softly. One afternoon, at the mercantile, Mrs. Bellamy, who had wanted her own niece to marry Caleb, spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. A man like Caleb Hart deserved a fresh start, not another person's troubles brought to his door. Mara froze beside the flour sacks. Eli heard it too. His small face turned red. Caleb entered just then. The whole store went silent. He looked at Mrs. Bellamy, then at Mara, then at Eli. For a moment, Mara thought he would say nothing. He was a man who avoided public scenes. He hated gossip. He hated being watched. But Caleb took off his hat. "My wife and her son are not troubles," he said quietly. "They are under my roof, under my name, and under my protection. Anyone who speaks of them with disrespect speaks against me." No one moved. Mrs. Bellamy looked away first. Caleb turned to Mara. "Are you ready to go home?" "Home?" It was the first time he had called it that. Mara nodded, but tears burned behind her eyes. That night, after Eli fell asleep, Mara found Caleb on the porch. "Thank you," she said. "I should have said it sooner. You do not owe me kindness in public only." Caleb looked at her. The words were not cruel. They were honest. Mara took a breath. "I came here because your letter sounded safe. Not warm. Not romantic. Safe. I thought safety would be enough." Caleb stared at the dark fields. "And now? Now I do not know." The answer struck him harder than anger would have. Mara folded her hands. "I do not need you to pretend. I know grief. I buried a husband. I buried a life. But I cannot raise my son in a house where half the rooms are locked and half the truth is hidden." Caleb closed his eyes. Behind him, inside the cabin, the forgotten letter sat in the drawer beside the Bible. The first truth she had ever sent him. And he had not trusted her with his. Before that door opens, what do you think Caleb has been hiding from Mara? A memory, a mistake, or a grief he never learned how to speak? The next morning, Caleb opened the locked room. Mara stood in the doorway. Dust floated in the pale light. The covered cradle sat against the wall. Caleb removed the sheet. The little wooden cradle appeared, smooth and beautiful, carved with tiny stars. Mara said nothing. Caleb's voice was low. "I built it for Anna, my first wife. She died before the child came. I closed this room and told myself I was honoring them. But the truth is, I was hiding from the part of me that still wanted a family." Mara stepped inside slowly. She touched one carved star with her fingertips. "It is beautiful. I thought if I cared for you and Eli too much, God might take you too." Mara looked at him then, and her face softened with pain. "Caleb, fear is not the same as faithfulness." He bowed his head. "I know." But knowing did not heal everything at once. And the hardest test had not yet come. For the first time, Caleb called the ranch home. But one brave sentence in town could not heal the silence waiting for them back at the cabin, the blizzard, and the broken bridge. In early October, the first hard storm came down from the mountains. It began as rain, then turned to sleet, then snow. The wind pushed against the cabin walls like a living thing. Caleb rode out before dawn to bring cattle down from the ridge, expecting to return by noon. By afternoon, he had not come back. Mara kept the fire high and Eli close. Then a neighbor boy pounded on the door, breathless and pale. "Mrs. Hart, the creek bridge is washed out." Mr. Hart's horse came back alone. Mara's heart dropped. Eli began to cry. Every fear in that cabin woke at once. The town men gathered near the creek, arguing over the crossing. The water was high, brown, and fast with broken branches. Snow fell thick enough to blind a man. Some said they should wait until morning. Mara pushed through them in Caleb's old coat. "My husband is out there." Sheriff Doyle frowned. "Mrs. Hart, no one can cross that water in this dark." Then we go along the ridge trail. That trail is half gone. Mara looked at the men, one by one. "You call him honorable when he fixes your barns, pulls your calves, and lends money without asking for thanks. But now that he needs help, you want daylight and comfort." No one answered. Mara turned to the barn. "I will go myself." What would you have done in Mara's place? Stayed for the safety Caleb offered, or left because a safe house without love can still feel lonely? That moved them. Within minutes, 3 men saddled horses. Sheriff Doyle cursed under his breath and followed. Pastor Reed took a lantern. Mara stayed at the front. She did not know the land as Caleb did, but she knew fear. She had lived with it. She had carried it, and she would not let it choose for her. They found Caleb near a ravine, pinned beneath a fallen branch, half frozen but alive. His face was white. His lips were blue. When he saw Mara, he thought at first he was dreaming. "You came," he whispered. Mara knelt in the snow and took his cold hand. "I told you I was tired of being brave alone," she said. "I did not say I had stopped being brave." The men lifted the branch and carried Caleb back. For 3 days, fever held him. Mara sat beside him, changing cloths, feeding him broth, whispering prayers when she thought no one heard. Eli placed his repaired wooden horse on Caleb's bedside table. On the second night, Caleb woke to find Mara asleep in the chair, her head bowed, one hand still holding his sleeve. He looked at her hand, then at the letter on the small table beside the Bible. She had found it while searching for clean cloth. The forgotten letter. The beginning of everything. He remembered her words. I have been brave for so long that I am tired of being brave alone. For the first time, Caleb understood that answering the letter had not made him her rescuer. It had made him responsible for being honest. Mara had crossed the storm to save his life. But when Caleb woke, he would learn that saving a man's body is not the same as saving his marriage. The letter finds its home. When he recovered enough to sit by the fire, Mara grew quiet. Too quiet. The storm had passed, but the quiet inside the cabin became colder than the snow outside. Mara had one last choice to make, and Caleb had one last chance to tell the truth. One evening, he found her folding Eli's shirts into the carpet bag she had brought from Missouri. Caleb had faced frozen cattle, broken bridges, and a ravine that nearly took his life.